Good morning and welcome to our February 2018 customer webinar. As many of you know, in just a couple of weeks, Google will begin enforcing the Coalition for Better Ads standards in its Chrome browser. Sites that run afoul of these rules may see their ads blocked, resulting in a big revenue hit. Today, Christine Masters, Director of Product Management, Phil Pracht, Revenue Product Manager, and Stevie Longwith, AdOps Program Manager, will give you an overview of the Better Ads standards and the steps you need to take to keep your digital ad revenue flowing. I'm Aaron Gillette, Marketing Director at townnews.com. The presentation will take about 30 minutes with a Q&A to follow. At any point, you can type a question into the question box, but we'll hold off on answering them until the end of the show. Take it away, team.
Thanks, Aaron. Today, we'd like to cover, of course, these Better Ad standards and this Google Chrome ad filtering and how that's going to impact you, and, of course, how to actually view whether or not you haven't got any issues with your site via ad experience reports. So we're going to kick it off probably to Stevie to begin with, to talk a little bit more about the Coalition for Better Ads and more or less why this is all kind of happening and what to prepare for. So Stevie, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Well, here you go. We're going to...
Alrighty. So we'll go ahead and get started with the Coalition for Better Ads and what these Better Ad standards are that we are continually talking about and mentioning lately. So the Coalition for Better Ads was established to improve the consumer's experience with online advertising overall. They were established in September of 2016, have been working over the past year with publishers, advertisers, agencies, and trade associations to conduct a research with users to find out what type of ads cause the most irritation and what type of ads cause users to install ad blockers in the first place. From this research, they've established the Better Ad standards. And what the purpose behind these Better Ad standards is to allow publishers to be aware of what users find unacceptable and what type of ads overall would cause them to install an ad blocker or abandon the page or overall look for a different site rather than your own to consume content based on a poor advertising experience. Overall, we do have some global data based on devices using ad blocking software. Over 615 million devices are currently blocking ads worldwide, and within the past 3 years, mobile has eclipsed desktop. This does not necessarily correlate with all of our town news clients. Town news clients tend to be a little bit lower on the side of ad blocker usage, but we thought it was a good idea to include some data as far as what the past 3 years and previous to that have looked like as far as ad blocking software usage. One of the great things that the Coalition for Better Ads has done is give us some more information on why users actually do block ads. So overall, users install ad blockers or abandon pages due to intrusive and annoying ad experiences. Any type of ad that interrupts the user, distracts them, or causes the page to be too cluttered for the user to access the actual content they went to the page for, causes the user to either abandon or install an ad blocker so that they can more easily access that content on that page. What the Coalition for Better Ads is working to implement is standards that will allow you to to load your ads more quickly, be more relevant to the users and the content, and include proper placement on pages so that you can have an immersive and relevant experience to that user without losing all of your ad revenue, but also without causing the user to install a blocker of some sort. There are different standards for desktop and mobile usage. One of the biggest changes in the past several years has been the rise of mobile. At this point, the majority Over 50% of web traffic for the majority of Town News customers comes from a mobile device, but the desktop experience is still critical. The better ad standards on desktop mention that you need to avoid pop-up ads, any auto-playing video ads that also play with sound, pre-stitial ads with a countdown that don't have the ability to click or X out of, and then any kind of large sticky ad that covers a large portion of the screen. So those are the type of things that will monopolize your real estate on desktop and cause irritation to users. As far as mobile goes, there are a lot more stipulations on mobile because of the very limited screen size. So being mindful of your ad experience on every style of page layout is also critical. Any type of pop-up ads, pre-stitials, or post-stitials, full screen takeovers, where you're limiting your user's ability to see the content are obviously going to be a problem here. Any type of flashing animated ads, autoplay with sound, large sticky ads that cover a large percentage of the screen are also going to be an issue. Overall, ad density is going to be one of the most critical areas. So taking your desktop and your mobile sites, looking through them, making sure that you don't have any of these exact offending ad types is going to be your first step. After that, you're going to want to focus on the ad density. The ads on the page need to make up for less than 30% of the space on the screen at any time, which obviously can be a difficult problem for mobile since you have such a small viewport. This is also in relation to the area of the page that has content on it. So a lot of people have had questions in related to below article content. This 30% ad density limit is from the top of the page to the bottom of the article or main content section. So if you have a below the article ad that is larger than 30% of the screen, that is not going to apply to your ad density. But if you have multiple in-story ads with not enough space in between, or a very large in-story ad like a 300 by 600, then you're going to run into issues with your ad density being too much, and that will trigger the better ad standards to Chrome ad filtering. So that is definitely something that is going to take a little more time and a little more thought on your part in making sure that not only are you eliminating the offending ad types, but you're also ensuring that your density of ads on your page is in good condition and that you're not cramming them all into one area on a certain viewport.
All right, thanks, Stevie. So I'm going to take over here and talk about a little bit more about the Chrome ad filtering aspects that are coming up here. So there is a date. We have ad filter starts on February 15th, 2018. We're talking 14 days from now. And sorry for anyone who's listening after this to the recording. But yeah, we have, this is coming up very quickly. We have some sites who have actually received reports, some warnings, letting them know that they are up for review and that they need to fix these. But in general, on the 15th is when, if any of those pre-existing reports have already been sent, is when sites may or may not have their ads actually turned off. So kind of talking about this a little bit more, what these ad experience reports are, these are manual reviews by Google representatives who are coming to your site and looking for those better ad standards that we just talked about, that Stevie talked about. So any violations that they're doing, and they're looking at this by hand, if they're seeing ad density that's higher than 30%, they can issue a warning for this site. And in 30 days, if you haven't fixed that, they will turn you off. In other words, there will now be a message saying, this site has been in violation for better ads experience, and you can either turn it on, I think, manually at that point, but otherwise it's off by default for any of those Google Chrome users. And what we're looking at least with the block CMS hosted sites, over 30% of monthly traffic is coming from Chrome browser. So that's potentially a lot. And we'll talk a little bit more about the other impacts here. But again, these are all ads, whether it's DFP, Ad Manager, or let's say if they can track whether or not it's a sponsored story or any sponsored blocks, they will look at this, and because it's being paid for by a third party, that means if you have a newsletter sign-up block, that's a pop-up that's going to say it's sponsored by this local business, that's considered an advertisement, and that's going to be a ding against this ad density report and any of these pop-up ads. So it's important to know that any of these third-party paid-for widgets, any of these third-party stories, any ads that are already on your site are up and considered to be advertisements and are going to be potentially in violation of the better ad standards. And not to mention, of course, Microsoft has actually joined the Coalition for Better Ads, so they are probably next in line to roll out something similar to what Chrome is doing. And then, of course, Safari and Mozilla have not yet joined, but I would be aware of them possibly inheriting or doing something similar to what Chrome is already doing. So suddenly that 30% of Chrome only is now possibly an 84 or 85% monthly traffic risk that you might be losing. So all of those ads for potentially all those browsers on a monthly basis might be blocked. So it's important to take this seriously. I was joking about this earlier, like in our announcements for this webinar, perhaps we should have fire emojis and make sure that this is very important. Whatever it is that we have to do to make sure that you are aware of all of this stuff, you need to know about the better ad standards and the Chrome ad filtering come February 15th. So again, other browsers are expected to join this and to enact similar policies similar to the better ad standards. So be aware of this, and we do have some suggestions on what you can do. As I mentioned before, the ad experience reports, we'll get to that in a second, but the self-audit your site with those better ad standards, and they do have a website. The Coalition for Better Ads has a website, and there are all of those instances you can read more about, these pop-up ads, these large sticky ads, all of these instances that are violations. You can actually review and get more details on the Better Ad Standards website. And what I would do is, take a look at your site, go through these things, pick a short article, pick a long article, how many ads are appearing on those articles. And measuring, obviously, the density for that is a bit more trying, and if you need help, you can contact us and we can help you with that stuff. But more important is to kind of take a look with the better ad standards in mind and review your site. And of course, because it's not just ads or Ad Manager, DFP, OAS, these are also the third-party sponsored blocks, like businesses. If you have a business widget, that counts. If you have classifieds blocks, those also count. Sponsored stories and any sponsored widgets, like a sponsored weather block or a sponsored newsletter. Any of that is also contributed to the better ad standards and may be in violation if it's too much or an obtrusive matter that the better ad standards seeks to fix. Of course, remove all of those non-compliant ad types if you have them, if you're noticing. Be ahead of the game when possible. And then we also do have a feature that you can read a little bit more about on documentation in our Town News site, the automatic ads. And this is already an effort that we have to improve your ad density for a page. And what this does is more or less, and Christine, you're welcome to talk about this a little more, but what it does is that in any single story, there is going to be likely a few in-story ads. What the automatic ad setting will do is measure how much of the story is actually going to be in there and then make sure that only one or maybe potentially two ads will appear there for those short stories, or automatically insert ads thereafter for longer stories so that you don't have to worry about having 4 ads stacked on top of each other that you did not kind of anticipate having happen. But again, if that were the case, if you had 4 ads stacked on top of each other, that would likely be in violation of the better ad standards, that ad density portion. So take a look at your site and review it and see if there's anything that is in violation of those better ad standards, as soon as possible. And talking a little bit more about those Google Ad Experience reports, and we're actually going to show you an example at the end here, but this is something that you have access to. And if you don't already have access to it, then it's likely someone in your company already does. I would be in touch with them. If you need help with that, we can potentially help you point you in the right direction. But the idea is that there is this search console that you have accessible for your site that already has this review, your ad experience reports, that already has a review in there. And there's going to be a number of statuses. Most likely, sites are either passing right now or they're not been reviewed. But if you are in warning and you haven't received it, then it's important that you go and get yourself signed up so that you can get these alerts. So when you do, in fact, get a warning, you can make these changes. Part of these also includes that if you do indeed receive a warning, they will send you this email letting you know that your site is in warning stage and that you are in violation. And then, of course, you have those 30 days to fix it. But including with that, you have also video evidence and what standard it rolls up into. Let's say you have ad density that's in violation. They will actually record a video, and you can have access to that example of what they found. And, of course, you have 30 days to fix that issue, and then at that point, you have to resubmit your site for review. And it's, again, manual review. And if they find that you're continuously in warning, they may just fail you. So it's important to make sure you have access to these ad experience reports, and as soon as possible. Go in there and take a look and see your current review. Again, most are either passing or they've not yet been reviewed. These are a manual process for each and every one of these websites, so it's going to take a while, but I would strive to get ahead of the game, make sure that your site is compliant before you are either passing, warning, failing, or, of course, review pending. If you've submitted it or resubmitted it, they'll actually go into a pending state.
And just to add to that really quickly, the video evidence is really helpful because we've seen a couple of situations where it's like you might be in violation for a pop-up ad. And you're like, what? That's not fair. I don't have any pop-up ads. But then you look at the video and, oh, okay, well, on that one page that they happened to go to, there happened to be the situation that one could interpret as being a pop-up ad and et cetera, et cetera. So they will look at, and like Phil said, as a manual review, they will look at a couple of pages on your site manually and what they happen to look at that site. If it happens to be a really short article, or it happens to be a 404 page, or it happens to be a really long article, all of those things, you can see what they ended up on and what triggered their reporting. So
yeah, very, very helpful, and we'll again show you at the end here an example of one of these reports, right? Mm-hmm. All right. Here's, I guess, a quick screenshot, a screen grab of what a warning status might look like. And you have, again, the issue, ad density higher than 30%, the description of that issue that you can correlate to the Better Ad Standards website. And then it'll actually have 3 examples, view 3 examples there shown, which are more or less links to the videos that you can kind of see, and them likely scrolling through any of that. The ad density, by the way, it's important, and it's also confusing, the most confusing, I would say, but it's only mobile. So you're only going to get this ad experience, this ad density higher than 30% for mobile. That's currently. Maybe they might change it in the future, but as of now, the Better Ad Standards only for ad density higher than 30% only affects mobile. So that's to say, I would also, while you're doing your self-audit, of course, look in different browsers, look in different devices, tablet, of course, mobile. What are the ads? How often are you seeing them? Do you think it's too many ads that you're actually viewing in those mobile view? Then likely go through it, and you can do your own measurements, of course, thereafter that. So, actually, Christine, I'm going to pass it to her, and she can give you some examples of some of the things we talked about.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So I will say one quick thing. We've known about this for quite some time, that this has been, announced for a while, but a lot of the details were not really made available as to how they would interpret 30% and what types of things were affected, and all of those details are now starting to come out. One resource I would recommend is there's a Google product forum for the ad experience, and there's a lot of traffic there with actual Google employees answering questions. And so you can see there's a lot of people that are like, in this weird edge case situation, would you interpret this to be this way or this to be this way? Or people who got flagged for something that didn't feel it was fair, and they're kind of explaining to them why they were flagged, or in some cases explaining to them that they agreed that that wasn't a violation and that they should resubmit with an explanation of why it wasn't a violation. So there's a lot of details there that can be very helpful. But what I kind of wanted to show was a couple of examples of some of the things to look for, and just like explain a couple of situations that you might have to help you kind of plan for this and make some choices. I will say that really across the board, the two things that we see the most violations on, and almost everything that's getting reviewed right now is mobile. I don't think I've seen any desktop reviewed at all yet, but a lot of it's been mobile, and the violations on mobile are almost always either a pop-up ad or ad density. And both of those two things, pop-ups are pretty easy. You probably will know if you have pop-up ads on your site. The ad density is much more difficult. And I will, add to something Phil said earlier. Things like business directory ads or classified ads technically do count. What their standard is any kind of third-party transaction where a third party, an advertiser, has paid you money to put this thing there. That's considered a paid ad, and those transactions, if they can, like Phil said, if they can figure them out, and again, it's manual review, if they feel like this is a third-party transaction, commercial transaction, they will count that as an ad placement. So there might be some things where you just hard-coded a sponsorship thing on there, and you might want to try to argue with them that that's not DFP or that's not whatever. They still will, if they can tell that that's what that is, they still could count that towards your ad density. So that's important. But the one thing, the other thing that's very tricky with this, as both Phil and Stevie mentioned, is that the way that they calculate ad density on mobile is from the top of the story page, and they do include the top leaderboard ads in that. So essentially everything below your header. So top leaderboard ad, then your headline, all of your photos count, and then you have an ad here, and then you have another ad. Now in this case, I've got business directory ads, again, those count. In this case, I have a banner ad, again, so this is kind of that situation that Phil was mentioning where our default in-story ad algorithm on really short stories will continue to show all three of the in-story ad positions. And then towards the bottom of the story here, I've got some Outbrain and Taboola stuff going on. And so what you need to do is, and what Google will be doing, is doing a calculation for what is the ad density of your main content. So the thing that's really tricky with this is that they only count from the top of the page, so below the navigation. They do include the leaderboard ads, they include the headline, but then they only include through the end of the story. So in this particular case right here, I would only count towards the bottom of the story here. Theoretically, all of these things down here will not count. So typically on most of our sites, we'll have Taboola and Outbrain at the end of the story. Those things will not count towards the ad density calculations. So they'll basically take the entire story area from the bottom of the story up through the very top. That's essentially your denominator, and then they take and count the number of ads and their height, and then that's the top of the calculation, and then you divide them, and then you get that percentage. So in this case, I would go from the top of the article down through here, then I would go back and count my 2 ads, so these are going to be 500, and this page is probably fine because I'm only counted towards the end. Now, a couple of caveats in there. Obviously, again, if this happened to be maybe at the top of the page or at the top of my article, I would have to count these business directory widgets towards my ad density or ad content on that page that we'll take into consideration in that calculation. If Taboola or Outbrain was higher in the page or in the middle of the section before the end of the story, those would count towards my ad density. Another kind of caveat, again, that we've kind of learned through the message boards and through talking to, we've had several meetings with Google and gotten some clarification from them on things. And one other place that might be affected is that if you have next previous buttons, now this does not count, our next story, but pagination inside of a story where you have to go to the next page to continue reading the story. If your next page goes all the way down to the bottom of the article here, which I think it'll go to right here, then that does now take the next button for pagination into account. And now all of those bottom banner ads will start to count because they consider the next page button as a requirement to view the content, and then that becomes in play for the calculation on those pages. So that will happen again, not next story and previous story, those won't count, but for if you're using pagination or if you have a photo gallery, that those things will come into play. If you start having those next previous buttons, those will count, and then all of those ads that are above the next story will come into play. So again, you might be safe on all of your other pages, but on one story you have a pagination button, and then you end up counting some double up ads in that situation, and then you get flagged for that. So those are the types of tricky things to kind of watch for. As Phil mentioned, one of the things that I would definitely recommend to look into is we have a new ad layout that's called automatic ad layout. And in addition to the concept of placing ads throughout the story in a nice way, and I kind of have a little example here of, here's a story, and you can see that throughout the story, there's ads placed here on a smart, like an intelligent basis, so that instead of having stacked ads or instead of having 3 ads on a really short story, it takes into consideration the length of the content and then adds ads appropriately throughout the content to give you a better density. If a story only has one paragraph, you're only going to have one ad when you're using this layout model. So you both have the opportunity to have more ads on longer stories and then less ads on shorter stories. So that's something to look into. Essentially, that is available in our ad settings panel. It's called the ads on article pages. There's default, which is our standard mechanism that we've had for several years, and then there's the new one called automatic ad placement. And that's the one that has a better algorithm for short stories and long stories. So if you haven't looked into that yet, like Phil said, look at our documentation for that, and feel free to submit a ticket if you need help with that. That is definitely something I'd recommend. And then the other thing is definitely look at pop-up ads. So those are 2 things. Just very quickly, I wanted to go over, we talked about the web tools. If you have access to your Google Webmaster Tools, and like Phil said, if you don't have access, find out who does or contact us and we can help you get set up with those. But essentially, if you go into Web Tools in your Webmaster Tools bar, under there's an ad experience report. Like I said, most people don't have desktop yet, but you can check out mobile. And then you can see whether for your particular domain, if you've passed, what the status is, when it was taken, if there were issues, if there were videos, all of that stuff would be in here. If your site has ad filtering, then it will say ad filtering on. That means your site currently is not showing ads in Chrome. So this is the thing that will tell you whether or not Chrome is being monetized. One thing that is a nice thing to check, if you have the web developer tools available, or if you have a web developer who can look at this, there's actually a setting that is now available. If you go into this little panel over here and then go to settings, under here there's a thing that says force ad blocking on this site. If you check that and then refresh the page, you'll actually see what your site looks like when the ads are filtered. So we see on my page here all of the things that are being hit by ad filtering. So I have a big blank spot here, I have a blank spot here. They don't filter the business directory ads, because from a technical perspective, they can't see those. From a human review standard, they will. Here's another ad that's been blocked. Obviously, they're not blocking the Taboola ads right now. In our testing, we do see ad manager ads get blocked. So they are able to detect ad manager ads as ads, and those will be blocked if you are hit with ad filtering on your site. So just to kind of review, this is an important thing for everybody, whether or not you're using DFP, whether or not you're using Google Analytics, whether or not you're using Webmaster Tools, it doesn't matter. They will check your site, even if you have nothing to do with Google at all. And they will possibly start, if you're in violation of something, they will start in Chrome filtering your ads. And if they can detect any type of ads, like Phil said, OAS, Ad Manager, DFP, anything, those ads will be blocked on Chrome until the issues are fixed and it resubmitted. So it is a really important thing, and let us know if you need help with this or want to try to ask any questions. Like I said, we've had a lot of time to kind of interact with Google and ask them questions about specific use cases. So
some of the takeaways here, again, on the 15th, the Chrome ad filtering begins. I would encourage you to look at your ad experience report as soon as possible to see if there's any violations or if you are indeed passing. Great, but also do your own self-audit for your site. It's very important that you actually take a look at this on your own and actually make sure that all of this stuff is okay before you do indeed get reviewed.
And there are a lot of people that haven't been reviewed yet.
Yes.
So if you say status pending or whatever, there's not really any way for you to ask them to review it, or you can encourage them to review it faster or anything like that. You just have to wait and just be happy that you're, not reviewed yet. And like Phil said, take that time to do a self-audit.
Right. So again, the Coalition for Better Ads isn't a bad thing by any means. They're trying to fix a problem that's been happening for a lot lately. So you're looking at a lot of users adopting ad blockers, which is obviously very bad and detrimental to you. So what they're trying to do is fix it by, of course, providing these ad standards that they've researched and want to kind of issue towards everyone, kind of adopting, not only Chrome, but any other browser that happens to be coming up. So I think with that, if you have any other questions, I think we can take those now.
We have many questions.
Okay.
Many of them start with, what about?
Yeah.
What about? So anyway, we'll start working through those. We use the in-article utility region to host ad blocks, but these ad blocks are stacked when articles only have a few paragraphs. Can the system be set up to not show content placed in the in-article utility regions when there are only a few paragraphs? We don't want to get flagged for having ads over 30% on mobile because of this.
So 2 real quick thoughts for that. One is that in a lot of cases, those ads will show up below the end of the content. So it's very likely that they might not count. That being said, that's why we built the automatic ad algorithm, so that it's actually difficult for us to do that with the utility regions, because those are kind of hard placed on there. But doing the automatic ad layout is our current solution for that. It is possible that we might be able to do something else in the future with trying to maybe remove other things on really short articles or things like that. But as of right now, the automatic ads was our solution for that.
A lot of questions about whether the webinar will be recorded and posted. Yes, we are recording this, and we will post it along with the slide deck to a page on our website. We'll send an email with a link to that later on, probably tomorrow. It'll probably be processed today, and the email will go out tomorrow. These standards only apply to Chrome. What is Chrome's browser market share?
Again, 30, like I was saying earlier, I think it's 30% in a given month is allocated to Chrome. So, but it's important to note that not only Chrome is kind of following this and aware of this. Chrome is, again, part of the Coalition for Better Ads, but so is Microsoft. So you're looking at Edge, Internet Explorer possibly being another browser that's going to be inheriting these better ad standards as well. But also Mozilla and Safari are probably or likely to do something similar as well. So as I mentioned, 30% right now on a given month or so are affected by the Chrome browser. But then thereafter that, you're looking at if any of those others kind of adopt these standards, then you're looking at obviously a higher risk.
We have a block on our site that in which we display PDF versions of our newspaper ads. Our newspaper ads on the rail affected by the better ad standards in addition to banner ads.
So that is a really good question. Basically, what we have thus far been told by Google is that so again, the standard is if there was a third-party transaction, commercial transaction that paid you money for that placement, then that would count. Now, to be fair, whether or not they can detect that a third-party transaction happened or not is another issue, but technically we feel that those would count, or at least, I guess in the worst case scenario, those would count, because if they do detect that those are quote-unquote paid ad spots, that there was a third party paid you money to put that thing there, then that would count. Again, it only would come into play if it was as part of the content, right, the ad density within the content. Most of the time, those types of ads are going to be below the story and then wouldn't count for that reason. But most likely they would be considered, if the right person reviews it, they would be considered to be an ad for the purposes of a third-party transaction commercial.
What if you have a paywall? How are they going to be able to audit those, especially article assets?
I mean, that's a good question. They wouldn't be able to get through the paywall. They would be able to evaluate the page with the paywall up. So obviously, you should look at your page with the paywall up, and whatever content is there and whatever ads are there could be taken into consideration for their calculations. Which obviously at that point you're only left with 2 paragraphs. So if you have a situation where you have enough ads on the page, or 2 leaderboards, and then a square ad, and then whatever the end of this content is, so probably the read more or the subscribe button, above that would be counted towards your content density, and then so you look at all of that visible content and then what the ads are in that space, and then do your calculation based on that.
How will this impact Outbrain and Taboola content?
So they are counted as ads, but like I said, most of the time those are at the bottom of your content. So as long as they're below the content and below any kind of pagination, then those would not be counted towards ad density.
And also that if they're viewing any of that content, that if it's paid for content, then Google, those manual reviewers will know that stuff, and that those won't actually be in violation. If someone came there specifically to view that piece of content, they know that this is a sponsored piece of content, and they know that they're reading that, so that's not going to be in violation of the better ad standards on the actual story page for those stories.
And just to reemphasize that, so I know that there's a couple people who have, you have a sponsored article or you have native content, and so that's a really good point that Phil made. If the promotion of the sponsored article on the front page or on another page theoretically would count as an ad, but if they clicked on that sponsored article, at that point the whole page is an ad, right? But in that case, they had said, and again, this is a clarification that they made on the message board. In those cases, because the user went there to view that paid content article, that they would consider that to be content, and then it kind of acts as an ad at that point, and then they look at the other ads on that page. So that's a really good clarification, because that's something that, if they happen to show up on a sponsorship article, does that mean your whole site gets dinged? But no, they have a kind of a caveat for that.
Right.
Is a leaderboard sticky ad, 728 by 90, considered too large under the better ad standards?
So a sticky position, so what they look at for the large sticky is 30% of the screen. So that in this case, that's not a ad density issue, that's a screen issue. Mm-hmm. And on a sticky that is a leaderboard, should be fine, will be fine. If you do a billboard ad, which is like the 970 ad, those ones are the ones that are getting flagged. If you do like that giant sticky, those are the ones that are a problem, but leaderboards are fine.
Does this also mean that the standard most popular block widget counts against the better ad standards?
I would not think so, because
No.
that would be organic content to
Yep.
your site, and then that I would think would be fine.
Okay. How many paragraphs is the ideal space between ads and an article?
Yeah, I think that there's still we're still looking at that. I would say that our recommendation right now would be between 5 and 8. We actually have a feature request in to have different numbers on mobile versus desktop, because 8 is really long on mobile, but is pretty good on desktop. So we're looking at a way to have different numbers in there, but I would say between 5 and 8.
Okay. Would the friends to follow block be affected?
So I think that the friends to follow, that's like a third-party widget that shows social content from paid advertisers. And if they are paying money for that widget, then that widget would count towards ad content. And so again, look at the placement of where that is on mobile, and if it's like in the right rail, so it ends up on the bottom of the story in mobile, that should be okay. But if you're putting it in a place where it shows up in the content or above the content on mobile, then I would look at that. Also, to clarify with that, there have been sites who have asked about third-party widgets that have content, but then they also have some ads on it. So think about like a weather widget where there's a bunch of weather content, but then they have a skyscraper ad inside of that content. Does that count because I don't have any control over that third-party widget and how many ads they put in there or whatever? And it does count. So you are responsible for all of the widgets and all of the content that you put on your site, even if it is a widget from a third-party vendor. So in those cases, you make the same calculation, count the content, count the ad sizes, and then make the calculation if there's an ad density problem. That will count.
Can you resubmit for review before the 30 days are up?
Definitely.
Yes.
We use some 3-panel animated GIF ads that show each panel for 4 seconds. Will these be allowed, or will they be considered flashing ads?
I think by flashing ads, they're meaning more or less colors and being, I guess, a bit too much obtrusive. I think if you're just sliding images to images after 4 seconds, I think you would be okay. But again, we can't tell you exactly whether or not they would ding it or not until they actually start doing that. And right now, based on their description of the flashing ads, it does not seem like you would be included in that.
It's more like epilepsy risk.
That's right.
Type.
Yep.
Will Google fail sites for any use of pop-up or expandable ads?
You will likely be warned, and then you will be failed if these pop-ups aren't fixed in the 30-day time frame.
Yeah, and as far as expandable ads, there's more gray area on expandable ads now. There are some ad types like reveal ads that have not been specifically tested yet, and those are not on the list of violations yet. They could be in the future. They're continuing to do testing, user testing on these, and if any new ad type gets tested by their kind of user group, and they have they do surveys of a bunch of users. If a new ad comes out and they do a test with their user group, and more than 50% of the users say that this is a disruptive ad, then that ad type will be added to the violations list at that point, and then that would become in play. But as of right now, the reveal ads are not included. Ads that kind of jump out or roll out, they might be included, and they might count those as overlays or pop-ups. But in general, if you can close them, that has been helpful.
Also add to that, another type is in-stream video. That's also not yet included, but they're also looking at those instances as well. But it's not included yet in the better ad standards.
And I think it's important to note, too, that one really good example of this is Forbes.com, where they have that kind of pre-stitial ad that has the countdown, and they have actually been reviewed and approved as okay. So that implementation of kind of the pre-stitial situation before you go to the story has been okay because number one, it's not a pop-up, it's not covering content once the content is loaded, and number two, there's a button that says go to the site so that you're able to click through it right away, and that has been a good example of a pre-stitial / pop-up type sort of ad that has been approved.
From one more quick note on that, from everything that I've understood with the way that the pop-ups and pre-stitials and any expandables is if they don't have any close function on them, or you have to wait for an option to close, they're much more intrusive than something that does have a close function. But I would take anything that they say and be as safe as possible. If you do have a lot of pop-ups on your site, or you do have a lot of pre-stitials or interstitial style ads, I would definitely closely evaluate those and monitor your report very, very carefully.
And to add to that too, because I know that someone will probably ask this, something like an email sign-up pop-up are not included at this time because those aren't third-party transactions. That's just a pop-up. And as of right now, those are okay. So subscription pop-ups, email sign-up pop-ups, circulation pop-ups, those are okay if they're not a third-party commercial transaction.
How does the density of ads on the rail affect the 30% equation standard for articles and content?
The right rail will always, of course, come after the main content. So if there is ads in the right rail, again, this is mobile only, is the ad density. So if you're in mobile, that right rail will actually fall into the bottom of the story. So it won't impact density for that specific story, unless there's anything else you want to add to that.
Nope.
Okay. Just to be clear, Google will turn off all ads if a site is in violation, correct? Not just Google AdSense ads.
Yep.
All ads.
So yeah. So let's reinforce this because this is like, and like in talking to customers, I've had this question where they're like, okay, but like just the one ad that's bad? No, all ads. Just the one page that's bad? No, all pages. Just the one ad network that they can, no, all ad networks that if they can tell, so Ad Manager, OAS, AdSense, DFP, anything that they can programmatically tell is an ad, which is surprisingly a lot, will be included in ad filter. So the entire site, every page, every ad, all blocked. So if you have one page with one pop-up that's one violation thing, that could cause literally the entire site to be ad filtered.
Mm-hmm.
Could you please repeat which Google product forum had the discussion on this?
We'll include a link of that in the webinar when we post it afterwards.
Okay. We have Outrain as a sticky ad at the bottom of mobile. How do we switch it to show what you are showing below the article and not a sticky pop-up?
I would submit a CRM ticket to our site, and we can work on that with you.
What about the Taboola video that starts playing at the bottom of the screen?
So, like with, in general, that doesn't count as a more than 30% of the screen for that large sticky percentage, and it doesn't count as a sound violation. So thus far, those seem to be okay, as long as they don't hit any of those other violations. That being said, if you have any questions or concerns about that or a specific use case, feel free to submit a ticket and we can look at that particular situation.
Do house ads count? If we're using an ad position through DFP to promote our own content or products, do those count as ads since we won't be getting paid for them?
So for the purposes of calculations towards ad density, those would not count because it's not a third-party commercial transaction, but it will get blocked because they can't tell the difference between what it actually is. So if you're in a ad filtering blocking scenario, those would get blocked. But in terms of if you have like hey, you should subscribe to our paper served through DFP, and that's at the top of the page, then that would not count towards ad density. Now, again, these are human reviewers, so if a human reviewer looks at it and it looks like enough like an ad, then they might count it. But based on the rules, it technically wouldn't count.
What you can do, of course, is in your fix, when you're resubmitting, you can confirm after you've looked at the video that this is indeed your house ad, and then once they submit, re-review, they can take this back. So that's important to note, that if you are indeed dinged for these house ads, that during this resubmission review part of this, you can point out and clarify that this is indeed a house ad and should not be considered.
Does the automatic ads setting only work with mobile?
No, it works with desktop as well.
Are the auto ads configurable as far as what if I would prefer to have 0 ads on a 1-paragraph article?
Not really. We're going to show a specific spot there, so it's possible that depending on the situation, you might not be able to fill that specific spot, but probably that would not be configurable. I would, if you have a specific use case, submit a ticket. We're always interested in hearing feedback from any specific case like that maybe we can make updates or alterations or maybe a new algorithm for those.
What we do have is it is configurable in that you can set the number of paragraphs between.
Right.
So if it's not necessarily 0, but if you wanted to do it, like we recommended before, between 5 and 8, you can also set that there. So there is some configuration there, but making sure that you don't want them to appear at all for short stories is something that, again, I would submit a ticket to that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, what it'll do is it shows for, basically the first ad shows after the 3rd paragraph. For any story that's less than 3 paragraphs, it just shows that first paragraph at the end of the content. So
it shows the first ad at the end of the content.
Right. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it shows the first ad at the end of the content. But again, theoretically, that ad, because it's after the content, doesn't count towards the ad density. So
Google's ad filtering will remove the ads but leave a huge blank space?
So that's a good question, because I have seen a couple of sites where when I tested them with ad filtering, so for example, an ad manager site, the actual white spaces did collapse, but I think that it depends on if you have an iframe. If there's an iframe situation, the iframe does show a big blank spot, but if it's a scenario where it's like a straight up ad tag on the page without an iframe, those ones seem to be collapsing. So it kind of depends on the technology and the situation, but probably in a majority of situations, there will be a giant blank spot there.
Mm-hmm.
We've tried automatic ads, but they only showed up after the 3 in-article utility units. How many paragraphs do there have to be before automatic ads show up?
It depends on how many paragraphs you choose in there. So the first position will show up after 3 paragraphs, and then after the first position, it's every X number of paragraphs after that, you'll get another spot. So if you only have one ad spot that you are going to put in all of the positions, then just file that one to the 3 fixed position first and then the automatic position, and then they'll all just rotate in there. But again, depending on the specific case, that there might be situations that we could help you with there. So feel free to submit a ticket and we can work with you on that.
Can you review where I can turn on automatic ads in blocks?
Yeah, I think we still have the tab open.
Yeah. It's basically in the URL panel for advertising. So that's the advertising group right there. And then down a little ways, there's a spot where it says the article ad layout, or the ads on article pages, and then you choose the automatic ad there. Then the 2 additional things that you have to fill out is the number of paragraphs you want between ads, and then the block ID of the actual ad position that you want to be in those automatic spots. So you'll create a block, and then you get the ID from the ad block there, and then you just place that number in the setting panel.
And also important to reference, this is all documented, so
Yep.
you can visit our documentation site for search automatic ads, and you'll have even more information about how to do this if you need it.
If we have questions, who should we contact with them? What email address should we contact?
Customer service. We have, you file a CRM ticket to get any of that stuff.
Do ads that are on our homepage and section landing pages where article content is not shown in its entirety count as well?
Yeah, theoretically it will count. Basically, it becomes difficult as to what to define as the content, obviously. And again, looking at that Google product forum, there has actually been a couple of questions about this specifically. If you go to a 404 page, what is the content on the 404 page? And so the 404 message itself is what counts as the content, and they will calculate the 404 message and content versus the number of ads on the page that are above the end of that message. So, but yeah, so far, I mean, we've seen almost always just the article pages because those are the primary point of entry of the site. But in theory, the content of the page counts as content, and then they will subtract out the ads.
Yeah, I think that same answer applies here. There's a question about a laundry list of different types of pages: classifieds, business directory, auto and real estate vertical pages, live edition pages, river of news ads. Do all of those,
fall under
all of those be evaluated?
Possibly, right? Exactly. That's the point. I think is that all pages are up for review. Any one page, whether it's an article or a business directory landing page or a classifieds page.
And again, if they happen to go to the classified ad itself,
right, that
would count towards what we were saying earlier, where the classified ad at that point becomes the content,
right,
because they clicked on it, and then they would evaluate between the other ads on that page and the classified ad. So you wouldn't have a situation where it's like the whole thing's an ad because it's a classified
right
page. They do count that as content.
That's in the similar vein of any of the Outbrain or Taboola instances, where the sponsored content is the content, the main content. Otherwise, everything else is what's up for review.
Is TownNews.com able to detect if the browser agent has blocked all ads for a particular page?
So we do have basically a Google Tag Manager event that attempts to see if ads are blocked, and it wouldn't necessarily see this situation per se, but any type of ad blocking. We essentially set up what's called a honeypot, which is like a fake ad, and then we can see whether or not our fake ad, it's basically just a JavaScript function in there, and they can tell whether or not that JavaScript function was defined, and then that's how we can tell whether or not an ad was able to be played on this page. So we do have that number that is an overall ad blocking number, and that's something that if you're using Google Tag Manager, we can show you how to add that to your Google Analytics, submit a ticket, and we'll help you with that. But as for counting this specific situation, I don't know yet if there's going to be a way for us to detect this or if Google's going to provide something for that. Other than the webmaster tools, and there is an API available that shows you a list of all sites that are in violation and things like that. So we're looking into a lot of those tools. But as of right now, there isn't a specific way for us to see the percentages of this case or not. Hopefully that answered that.
What about background ads and rail ads?
Yeah, I mean, again, technically, look at mobile view. Most of the time, if you're talking about the wallpaper ads, most of the time you don't have wallpaper ads on mobile, so those would not be taken into consideration with the mobile ad density. If you're talking about it on desktop, those don't hit any of the pop-ups or large stickies or all those type of things. So I think that would probably be fine.
Yeah.
I don't know if Stevie or Phil.
I would reference the Better Ad Standards. What they've currently got and are available are accessible on their site. And if your particular example doesn't actually match up to that, then you can or you can ask us, of course, at any point. Or again, with this Google forum, you can submit your site and see if this would be in violation. In which case, they are pretty good about replying and letting you know at that point whether or not it's in violation. But in general, I think we both kind of agree that not yet, not that we could.
Yeah, they might add additional parameters to desktop, But right now, desktop is pretty much, the main things are autoplay, videos with sound, and the pop-ups and the giant stickies. And the sticky stuff has to be like covering content and stuck to the bottom of the page. If it's like in line, like it scrolls through. There's been some people who asked about kind of parallax ads that as you scroll down, it kind of takes over the page for a second and then goes away. And they've actually so far been okay with those types of things. But it's kind of just like the sticky ads that are just permanently blocking content that has been defined so far.
What about video pre-roll, post-roll, mid-roll?
So right now, those are okay. There has been a couple of situations where if you have a video pre-roll that is a pop-up ad, I mean, it's like literally inside of the video player itself, there's a square with a close button or whatever, and you might get dinged as a pop-up if it's inside of, even if it's inside of the video player. But the pre-rolls are okay as long as they have a skip ad and countdown and those types of things that are available in there. And again, they have really good, I mean, for some of these things, there is really good documentation out there, and they have some examples of those types of things, so they can give you in their documentation. We can link to this on the show notes for this, of some of those specific pages that they have the details on.
How might an advertising sales strategy be affected by the better ad standards? That is, will ad rates have to be increased because fewer ads will be displayed overall, or does another approach need to be taken?
That would be awesome.
Overall, we're seeing not only the programmatic, but the local ad industry shift a little bit to less is more. And I think a lot of these things that we've been speaking to today have to deal with that, where we want to make sure that the users are having a good experience and they have access to the content that they came for. Overall, if you're finding that you have to adjust your site and remove enough ads that your impression volume available to sell goes down, it is possible that you might need to increase your rates to compensate for that lack of impressions. And we've seen this a little bit on the programmatic side as well, where that space is becoming a premium, and those ads placements, the fewer of them they are, the more that they're actually worth. It's not an immediate effect. You don't have to make these changes and change your ad rates on all of your clients on the first day, but it's something to think about long term as you watch the impression volume change and keep track of impression forecasting while you make these updates to the ad placements on your site.
We have a sponsored video block. Would that be considered advertising?
Yes, it would.
Would third-party video ads that slide in at the bottom of the screen with the sound off trigger the ad blocker?
I think those would still be triggered.
Yeah, I mean, they will. So so the question is, are they a violation? They would definitely be blocked if they hit the ad blocker. But if they're sound off, and if they are not more than 30% of the screen, and if they are closable, then they are not currently counting as a pop-up, and so those seem to be okay. But again, some of this is a little bit gray area where, you see one person on the message board say that this doesn't count towards any of these things, but then somebody else might have gotten blocked for it because they interpreted things slightly differently when they looked at it. So some of those things are still being a little bit defined, but in general, those have been okay so far because they're not physically a pop-up.
Do lazy loading ads have any effect on any of this?
I don't think so. I mean, a lazy loaded ad that is in violation,
right?
Lazy loading doesn't save you from being against the better ad standards, but it's not either better or worse per se.
They will indeed be blocked if your site has failed.
Yes.
So.
Good point.
Okay, that is all of the questions so far. If anyone has any last thing they want to get answered, please speak now. Otherwise, yeah, you can contact our customer support team for any other questions you may have. Documentation on all of these features is available at help.blockcms.com. Support is available at 800-293-9576 or support.townnews.com. The partner community, as always, is a great place to swap ideas with other townnews.com partners and clients, and you can do that at community.townnews.com. And you can sign up to receive status updates on our systems and services at townnews.status.io. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. We also offer a number of email newsletters that we send out, and you can sign up for those by visiting townnews.com, clicking news, and you will see in the right rail, you'll see a sidebar that allows you to sign up for our various email lists. Thank you to everybody. Thank you for the awesome active Q&A session to everybody who joined, and thanks to Christine, Phil, and Stevie for a great presentation. We will talk to you again next month.